4 hobbits, 2 men, a dwarf, an elf, and a wizard. 9 companions. These heroes of the Third Age embarked on a quest that would hold the fate of Middle-earth. Mithrandir, Stormcrow, Olorin, Thakoon, the Grey Pilgrim, Gandalf. Gandalf the Grey was the second most powerful of the Istari, the Order of the Wizards in Middle-earth. He entered Middle-earth around the year 1000 of the Third Age. Upon his arrival, the elf Círdan gave Gandalf Narya, one of the 3 rings given to the elves. His purpose, along with the others within his order, was simple: to thwart the devious deeds of Sauron. Gandalf, along with the other wizards, were a part of the White Council, a group of wise figures from around Middle-earth. Other members of the council were Galadriel, Elrond, Círdan, and other influential elves. The council's main goal was to root out the growing evil of Sauron and prevent the Dark Lord from covering Middle-earth in his shadow. In the Third Age 2850, the White Council requested that Gandalf enter the fortress Dol Guldur as a spy to learn of its lord, for the council was aware that the fortress was under the influence of an evil power. Upon entering the fortress, Gandalf discovered that none other than Sauron himself had dominion over the fortress. Years later, in the Third Age 2941, Gandalf knew that Sauron's forces were growing, and that the enemies of Sauron would greatly benefit if Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, was reclaimed by the dwarves. The enemies of Sauron needed the mountain as a strategic stronghold in the inevitable wars to come. Gandalf was aware of this and implored Thorin to reclaim his home of Erebor from the great worm Smaug. Gandalf also persuaded Thorin to hire a certain hobbit as burglar of the expedition. After the adventures of Thorin and company and the Battle of the 5 Armies, the events covered in The Hobbit, Gandalf greatly suspected that the magic ring Bilbo had come across on the journey was indeed the One Ring. For the following 60 years after Bilbo returned home from the journey to Erebor, Gandalf, along with the Rangers of the North, kept a watchful eye on Bilbo and the Shire as a whole. In the Third Age 3001, Gandalf persuaded Bilbo to give the ring to Frodo. In the Third Age 3018, he set in motion the events that would encompass the Lord of the Rings. Born in the year 2931 of the Third Age, Aragorn II was the son of a Dunedain Ranger of the North, Arathorn II. Aragorn's name meant Royal Tree. He was the 16th and final chieftain of the Dunedain of the North. Elendil sailed to Middle-earth from the destruction of Númenor at the end of the Second Age. When Elendil passed, his son Anarion ruled Gondor, and Isildur ruled Arnor. Over the years, the line of Elendil waned in Gondor, and eventually there was no heir to the throne. In the north, the line of Isildur survived, and although Arnor dissolved, the Dunedain there lived on and became rangers to protect the innocent folk from orcs and other threats. At the end of the Third Age, 3 millennia after the fall of Númenor, Aragorn was the last surviving Dunedain of the royal line of Elendil, thus making him the sole heir to the throne of Gondor. Arathorn died when Aragorn was very young. Thus, young Aragorn went in secret to live under the protection of the elves in Rivendell, where he was raised. As a child there, he was known as Estelle until he turned 20, when Elrond told Aragorn of his true heritage. After learning this, Aragorn went into the wild, and for 2 decades learned various customs of different lands and peoples. In the Third Age 2956, he met the Grey Wizard Gandalf, and the two became great friends. In the years leading up to the War of the Ring, at the request of Gandalf, Aragorn hunted down and captured Gollum. In the Third Age 3017, Aragorn brought Gollum to Gandalf so that the wizard could learn of new information about the One Ring. In the Third Age 3018, Aragorn, under the name Strider, met Frodo and the hobbits in Bree. From there, he accompanied them to Rivendell. Son of Thranduil of the Woodland Realm, east of the Misty Mountains, Legolas was the lone elf in the Fellowship of the Ring. His name meant Green Leaf. Legolas was sent as a messenger from Mirkwood to Rivendell, where he attended the Council of Elrond. There, he joined the Fellowship of the Ring, representing the elves. Gimli, son of Gloin, dwarf of the line of Durin, was the dwarven representative in the Fellowship of the Ring. Gimli moved with his father Gloin to Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, after the dwarves reoccupied that hall after the death of Smaug and the Battle of the Five Armies. Gimli had spent his younger years in the northwest of Middle-earth, in the Ered Luin, the Blue Mountains. In the Third Age 3018, Gimli traveled with his father to Rivendell to take part in the Council of Elrond. Son of Denethor II and elder brother of Faramir, Boromir possessed many strengths. A strong and great captain of Gondor, his greatest weakness, however, was his pride, which was the root cause of his eventual demise. He led the defense of Osgiliath against the army of Sauron in June of the year 3018 of the Third Age. Soon after this, he, along with his brother Faramir, shared an ominous dream, which implored him to journey alone to Rivendell in search of answers to the meaning of the dream. Upon arrival at the Elven Haven, he took part in the Council of Elrond, along with Gandalf the Grey, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and other important figures of Middle-earth to determine the fate of the One Ring. Boromir believed the ring to be a great weapon and voiced his thoughts in using the One Ring against the forces of Mordor. Elrond and Gandalf greatly disagreed with this notion, explaining to those present the danger of wielding such a power and the great evil that would ensue if they used it for such a purpose. He became one of the 9 companions of the ring. When the Fellowship of the Ring encountered the Balrog in Moria, Gandalf rose to the occasion and showed how powerful he truly was. Although Gandalf had the outer shell of an old bent man, on the inside he was anything but. And in that moment with the Balrog, he harnessed the full might of his power. Gandalf was fueled by the Flame of Anor, also known as the Flame Imperishable, the light of Iluvatar, whereas the Balrog was fueled by the Flame of Udun, the fires of hell. The Balrog, although corrupted by the evil of Melkor, was also on that same plane of being as Gandalf, one of the Maiar. This is why Gandalf was able to go toe-to-toe with the ancient demon. When Gandalf fell with the Balrog in Moria, Aragorn became the de facto leader of the Fellowship. Wielding Anduril, reforged from the shards of Narsil, the sword of his ancestor Elendil. While the Fellowship was in Lorien, Legolas began to form a friendship with the dwarf Gimli. Their companionship would grow as the War of the Ring progressed. Boromir was greatly tempted by the calling of the ring and attempted to kill Frodo, the ring-bearer, and take the ring for himself. Once he came to his senses, he was greatly disturbed and regretted his actions. However, this dark deed drove Frodo away from the Fellowship to continue the journey alone. After Frodo fled, Amon-Hen was overrun by orcs, and Boromir fought off the incoming horde, protecting 2 of the other halflings in the company, Merry and Pippin. Despite a valiant effort, Boromir fell, attempting to protect the 2 hobbits from harm. Merry and Pippin were then captured and taken away by the enemy. After the Fellowship was broken and Boromir fell, Legolas, along with Aragorn and Gimli, set the fallen Boromir in a boat and sent him over the falls of Rauros. The trio then started a search for the abducted Merry and Pippin. Because of Gandalf's perseverance in his ultimate quest of defeating Sauron, Iluvatar gave him a new life after his epic clash with the Balrog, becoming Gandalf the White, the symbol and leader of the Istari, the one that Saruman was meant to be. While in Fangorn, searching for Merry and Pippin, Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn were reunited with Gandalf the White. They ended up in Rohan, where they participated in the Battle of the Hornburg, when Saruman's forces closed in on Helm's Deep, where at one point Gimli fought heroically in the Aglarond, the glittering caves of Helm's Deep. After the Battle of Helm's Deep, Gimli had slain 42 enemies, besting his friend Legolas by 1 kill. Before the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, Legolas was part of Aragorn's Grey Company that went down the paths of the dead, along with Gimli, Elrond's twin sons, Elladan and Elrohir, and 30 Rangers of the North. Legolas then fought in the gruesome Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Eldamar was the home of the elves in the west, and while Legolas was in southern Gondor at this time of war, he first beheld the Sea of Belagir, and the sight of it made him long to make the voyage to the west and finally see the home of his kin. Once the ring was destroyed and Sauron defeated, Legolas took a group of elves to Ithilien, the lands just west of the Mountains of Shadow that made up the western border of Mordor. There, they replenished that land after being devastated by the war. Gimli returned to the Aglarond in Rohan, where he had led a group of dwarves from Erebor. He was then known as the Lord of the Glittering Caves. He built new gates of Mithril for Minas Tirith and remained friends with the members of the Fellowship. Legolas finally made the journey oversea into the west. His longtime dwarven companion, Gimli, accompanied him. Legolas proved to be a very important figure in the Fellowship of the Ring, and fought valiantly to see the free peoples of Middle-earth defeat the Dark Lord Sauron, and finally bring peace to Middle-earth. Gimli was the first dwarf to cross the sea with the elves into the Undying Lands. He was known as Elf Friend, as well as Lockbearer, for he carried a lock of hair Galadriel gave him as a gift. Gimli was a strong, valiant warrior, and played a huge role in the success of the opposition against the Dark Lord Sauron, a friend, a warrior, and a true hero. When Sauron fell, Aragorn became King Elisar Telcontar of the reunited kingdom, ushering in the Fourth Age of Middle-earth. He married Arwen, daughter of Elrond, whom he had loved for many years. They had one son, Eldarion, and many daughters. As king, Aragorn extended the borders of the kingdom and brought peace and prosperity to the different regions of Middle-earth. Because the blood of the Númenóreans flowed in his veins, he lived a very long and prosperous life, for the Dúnedain of Númenor were superior to other lesser men in body and spirit, but, unlike the elves, they were still mortal. Aragorn died in the year 120 of the Fourth Age. Because Aragorn was such a strong leader in the War of the Ring, and his reign as king was so great, it was said of him that he restored the ancient nobility of his Númenórean ancestors. The following is an excerpt from The Return of the King and tells of the coronation of Aragorn. Then Aragorn took the crown and held it up and said, And those were the words that Elendil spoke when he came up out of the sea, on the wings of the wind. Out of the great sea, to Middle-earth I am come. In this place will I abide, and my heirs, unto the ending of the world. I think it's pretty safe to say that without the guidance and influence of Gandalf, the War of the Ring would have been a great defeat, and Sauron would have conquered all of Middle-earth. After the War of the Ring, Gandalf sailed across the sea into the west, with Bilbo, Frodo, and the other ring-bearers, for their time in Middle-earth was over, their mission complete. Sauron had finally been defeated. Even as the Grey Wizard, Gandalf was always the one closest to the elves, and of all the wizards, he was the only one who saw the value in seemingly small, insignificant things, like hobbits. Frodo Baggins was a hobbit from the Shire. His parents were Drogo Baggins and Primula Brandybuck. He was their only son. When Frodo was young, he was adopted by his cousin Bilbo after the death of his parents. The year that Bilbo celebrated his 111st birthday, he disappeared and went to Rivendell, leaving Bag End and his magic ring to Frodo. After many years, Gandalf paid Frodo a visit and told the hobbit of the nature of the ring that had been entrusted to him by Bilbo. During the conversation, Frodo's gardener, Samwise Gamgee, was caught eavesdropping. Sam was a hobbit from the Shire. His father, Hamfast Gamgee, was a gardener that tended to Bag End. When his father became too old for the work, Sam took over gardening responsibilities for the Baggins' abode. During this time, Sam became close friends with Bilbo, learning of all the adventures Bilbo had gone on in his life. A love and curiosity for the elves and their history grew in Sam after learning of their kind from Bilbo. At the behest of Gandalf, Sam accompanied Frodo on his journey to Rivendell. Thus began a quest that would forever change the life of both hobbits. The thought of meeting the elves was an exciting one for Sam, and he left the Shire alongside Frodo with determination to help his friend any way he could along the way. The son of Caradoc Brandybuck, Meriadoc, also known as Merry, was a close friend of Frodo Baggins at the time of the War of the Ring. He, along with Pippin Took and Samwise Gamgee, traveled with Frodo from the Shire, headed for Bree. Once the hobbits met Strider and Bree, the group made their way to the abandoned ruins of the ancient Amansul, also known as Weathertop. There, a dreadful occurrence took place that almost claimed Frodo's life. The Lord of the Nazgul stabbed him with a Morgul knife, an evil blade of dark sorcery. Immediately, though everything else remained as before, dim and dark, the shapes became terribly clear. He was able to see beneath their black wrappings. There were 5 tall figures, 2 standing on the lip of the dell, 3 advancing. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long gray robes. Upon their gray hairs were helms of silver. In their haggard hands were swords of steel. Their eyes fell on him and pierced him, and they rushed towards him. Desperate, he drew his own sword, and it seemed to him that it flickered red, as if it was a firebrand. 2 of the figures halted. The third was taller than the others. His hair was long and gleaming, and on his helm was a crown. In one hand, he held a long sword, and in the other, a knife. Both the knife and the hand that held it glowed with a pale light. He sprang forward and bore down on Frodo. At that moment, Frodo threw himself forward on the ground, and he felt a pain like a dart of poisoned ice pierce his left shoulder. Frodo, dropping his sword, slipped the ring from his finger and closed his right hand tight upon it. This stabbing would leave a lasting scar, both physically and spiritually, for Frodo. With the aid of the elven warrior Glorfindel, Frodo safely made it to Rivendell, where Lord Elrond mended his wound. While in Rivendell, Frodo attended the Council of Elrond, where he volunteered to take the ring to Mordor. The Fellowship of the Ring was formed, and the Company of 9 set out on the greatest quest of their lives that would hold the fate of Middle-earth. Merry, along with Pippin, stayed with the Fellowship until its breaking at Parth Galen, where Boromir fell. He and Pippin were then taken by orcs. The orcs that took Pippin and Merry captive were attacked by the Rohirrim, warriors of Rohan, allowing Merry and Pippin to escape into Fangorn Forest, where they befriended Treebeard the Ent, and journeyed with the old tree herder to meet other Ents at the Entmoot in order to plan their attack on Isengard.
The Ents made up their mind rather quickly after all, didn't they?
Pippin ventured to say after some time, when for a moment the singing paused, and only the beating of hands and feet was heard.
Quickly,
said Treebeard.
Yes, indeed. Quicker than I expected. Indeed, I have not seen them roused like this for many an age. We Ents do not like being roused, and we never are roused unless it is clear to us that our trees and our lives are in great danger. That has not happened in this forest since the wars of Sauron and the Men of the Sea. It's the orc work, the wanton hewing, Rorum. Wizards ought to know better. There is no curse in Elvish, Intish, or the tongues of men bad enough for such treachery. Down with Saruman.
Will you really break the doors of Isengard? Asked Merry.
Well, we could, you know. You do not know, perhaps, how strong we are. Maybe you have heard of trolls. They are mighty strong, but trolls are only counterfeits, made by the enemy in the great darkness, in mockery of Ents, as orcs were of elves. We are stronger than trolls. We are made of the bones of the earth. We can split stone like the roots of trees, only quicker, far quicker, if our minds are roused. If we are not hewn down, or destroyed by fire, or blast of sorcery, we could split Isengard into splinters and crack its walls into rubble.
After the breaking of the Fellowship at Parth Galen, only Sam continued on the journey to Mordor with Frodo. Soon after this, Gollum made himself known to the two hobbits and led them into the dark land of Sauron. On their way into Mordor, they passed through the lair of the giant spider Shelob. One of Sam's shining moments of loyalty to Frodo and the quest as a whole came when he took the One Ring on his own after Frodo was rendered incapacitated by Shelob. This act of courage on Sam's part kept the ring out of the hands of the enemy. Because of Sam's good nature, he was able to withstand the temptations of the ring while he held it. Sam used the Phial of Galadriel to blind the beast Shelob, and went on to save Frodo from the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Merry and Pippin and the Ents went on to defeat Saruman's forces at Isengard. Pippin found the Palantir of Orthanc and peered into it. He was then questioned by the Dark Lord Sauron, who believed Pippin carried the Ring of Power. Gandalf later took Pippin to Minas Tirith. After meeting Denethor, Pippin was made a guard of the Citadel, while Merry became esquire to King Theoden in Rohan. When the Rohirrim left Edoras to ride to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, Merry was ordered to remain in Rohan. However, he rode with Éowyn to join in the battle. In the midst of the great clash on the fields of Pelennor, Merry and Éowyn encountered the great Witch King of Angmar, the Lord of the Nazgul, and together slew the great foe. During the encounter with the Witch King, Merry was stricken with the Black Breath, the evil power surrounding the Nazgul, and because of this, nearly died, and was fortunately healed later on by Aragorn. Sam's diligence and devotion to Frodo and the quest was pivotal to the success of the destruction of Sauron and the One Ring. They entered the dark land of Mordor and made their way to Orodruin to destroy the ring once and for all. Once inside the mountain, Frodo was overcome by the ring's power and decided to keep it for himself instead of casting it into the flames. At this moment, Gollum reappeared and bit Frodo's finger off. In the scuffle, as fate would have it, Gollum tripped over the side of the ledge and plummeted to his death, and in the process, destroyed the ring in the fires of doom which had created it. So ended the terror of Sauron, the Lord of the Rings. After the defeat of Sauron, King Elessar made Pippin a Knight of Gondor. Merry returned to the Shire where he and Pippin led Hobbit forces in the Battle of Bywater against the remaining men fighting for Saruman. After the passing of his father, Merry was made Master of Buckland, where he was known as Meriadoc the Magnificent, and in the Fourth Age 14 became a Counselor of the North Kingdom. In the Fourth Age 64, Merry and Pippin made one last journey to see Rohan and Gondor. They spent their final days in Gondor. The two passed away and were buried in the House of the Kings. Following his quest to Mordor, Frodo returned to the Shire and served as mayor for a time. He documented the events of the War of the Ring in the Red Book of Westmarch. Although he had completed one of the greatest journeys in the history of Middle-earth, Frodo was greatly weary in his latter years and never fully healed from the stabbing at Weathertop and the poisoning he had endured by Shelob. He joined the last riding of the Keepers of the Rings over sea to the Undying Lands and left all of his belongings, including the Red Book and Bag End, to his companion Sam. Sam returned to the Shire and married Rose Cotton, and they raised 13 children. When Frodo left with the Keepers of the Rings over sea, Bag End was left to Sam and his family. He also became the keeper of the Red Book of Westmarch, which he contributed to. He also wrote other works of literature on his own. In the early years of the Fourth Age, Sam was elected mayor of the Shire several times, and upon the death of his wife, he was granted passage to the Undying Lands, for he had been a ring-bearer for a time. Sam was the definition of what a friend ought to be. It's pretty safe to say that without the love and dedication Sam had for his friend Frodo, the journey may very well have been a failure, and the ring most likely would have found its way back to the hand of its master. Thanks for watching. Until next time, my friends, take care.